In the Late Bronze Age, the Hittite Empire, known as the Kingdom of Hatti, stood as one of the great powers of the Near East, ruling vast lands from their capital at Hattusa. Yet beneath the administrative order and diplomatic treaties, the Hittites maintained a policy of calculated brutality against those who defied their rule. When provincial governors reported uprisings or border cities broke their oaths of loyalty, Hittite retribution was swift and merciless. Contemporary cuneiform tablets, inscribed in Akkadian and Hittite, record punishments that went far beyond simple execution. Rebels and captured soldiers were frequently subjected to disfiguring punishments, such as the removal of ears, noses, or hands, intended not only as retribution, but as a lasting symbol of disgrace. In some cases, the blinded or disfigured prisoners were sent back to their home cities, living symbols of the consequences of resistance. This was not an impulsive cruelty, but a deliberate tool of imperial control. The Hittite legal codes, preserved in fragments on clay, did not prescribe such mutilations for ordinary crimes, suggesting that these acts were reserved for political and military defiance. In this way, the state blurred the line between battlefield justice and psychological warfare. The practice also carried a symbolic weight. In Hittite culture, the human face was bound to identity and honor. To disfigure it was to erase dignity, rendering the victim a permanent testament to the empire's reach. This method was not unique to the Hittites. Other Near Eastern empires practiced similar punishments. But within Hatti, it formed part of a broader system of fear, paired with mass deportations, public executions, and the destruction of sacred places. In this way, the Hittites maintained order not just by sword and chariot, but by reshaping the human body into a tool of imperial propaganda. Impalement on the city walls, a warning to all. A corpse displayed above the city gates spoke louder than any royal decree. While impalement itself is not explicitly attested in surviving Hittite texts, other Near Eastern powers, most notoriously the Neo-Assyrian Empire, used the gruesome act as a form of psychological warfare. In the context of the Hittites, the historical record shows they shared the underlying principle. Punishments were staged in highly visible, ritualized ways, ensuring that the fate of rebels was both public and enduring. The fortified walls of Hattusa, known as the imperial heart of the Kingdom of Hatti, were more than defensive structures. They were symbols of divine and royal authority. When a rebellious city was taken, whether in Anatolia, northern Syria, or the upper Euphrates, the Hittites often brought captured leaders to the gates or walls, where their punishment could be witnessed by the assembled population. Surviving texts from the reigns of kings such as Suppiluliuma I and Muad'Ali II describe the binding of traitors before the gods, or in the presence of the army, sometimes followed by execution or mutilation. These punishments were not spontaneous acts of vengeance. They were part of a calculated, ritualized process in which justice was presented as an extension of divine will. The king, acting as the earthly agent of the storm god of Hatti, could order a public killing or symbolic humiliation. This could involve suspending a body from the city gates, placing decapitated heads on display, or keeping prisoners publicly restrained until death. The point was not merely to end a life, but to transform the body into a warning, an object lesson to the living. The use of city walls as a stage for punishment had deep cultural resonance. Walls defined the sacred boundary between the ordered world inside and the chaos beyond. To die upon them or be displayed there was to be cast permanently outside the community's protection. For conquered peoples, seeing the bodies of their leaders exposed against the sky made the empire's dominance tangible. Though the Hittites may not have practiced impalement in the same manner as the Assyrians, their approach achieved the same end, the visible destruction of an enemy's body as a public proclamation of Hittite authority. The walls became not just barriers of stone, but billboards of fear, reminders that rebellion was not only futile but would be repaid in a manner designed to linger in collective memory. Mass deportations, erasing cultures overnight. When the armies of the Hittite Empire, known as the Kingdom of Hatti, subdued a rebellious city, the victory was rarely followed by leniency. One of the most far-reaching punishments in their arsenal was mass deportation, a policy designed to dismantle resistance at its roots. Entire populations could be uprooted from their ancestral lands, marched across mountains and plains, and resettled in distant provinces under imperial control. Cuneiform tablets from Hattusa, especially from the reigns of Suppiluliuma I and Hattusili III, record such transfers in meticulous detail. Skilled artisans, scribes, and soldiers were often separated from the general population and sent to serve the empire's needs, while the rest were dispersed among rural settlements far from their original homes. This not only weakened the political cohesion of the conquered region but also ensured that the memory of rebellion was diluted through forced assimilation. The deportation process itself was a severe ordeal. Those who resisted, whether attempting to flee, hide, or fight back, could face swift and public consequences. Resistance during the march was met with immediate and severe consequences. Rebel leaders were eliminated publicly, families forcibly separated, and individuals subjected to punishments akin to those inflicted on battlefield captives. In certain cases, the Hittite military might burn homes and fields before departure, leaving nothing to return to. These mass relocations were not framed solely as acts of cruelty. Hittite inscriptions sometimes portrayed them as the ordering of a chaotic land, carried out under divine sanction. Yet for the displaced, the reality was one of cultural erasure. Temples, family tombs, and local shrines were left behind, sometimes deliberately destroyed, to sever the spiritual and ancestral bonds that tied people to their homeland. Strategically, deportations allowed the Hittites to repopulate strategic border zones, strengthen loyal territories with new labor, and strip rebellious regions of the manpower needed for future uprisings. Socially, they fractured communal identities, replacing them with dependence on the imperial system. The message was clear: rebellion did not end at the moment of defeat. Its consequences could span generations, with an entire people scattered and redefined under the shadow of Hatti's authority. Forced labor marches across harsh lands. Conquest in the Hittite Empire did not always end with execution or exile. For many captives, survival meant a life of relentless toil under imperial control. Forced labor was a critical element of the Hittite state, supplying manpower for monumental building projects, agricultural production, and military logistics. It was also a form of punishment, ensuring that those who had once resisted the empire would now serve it through their labor. Royal annals and treaty texts attest to the large-scale relocation of prisoners of war into labor camps or frontier settlements. These captives might be assigned to quarry stone for the massive walls of Hattusa, dig irrigation channels in newly conquered territories, or haul timber from distant mountain regions. Others served as porters, carrying military supplies across hundreds of kilometers of rugged terrain during campaigns. The marches themselves were a grueling ordeal. Captives were often driven on foot for weeks or months, chained together and guarded by soldiers. They traversed the varied and unforgiving landscapes of Anatolia, mountain passes swept by cold winds, arid plateaus where water was scarce, and dense forests where progress was slow. The Hittites planned these relocations for strategic reasons, but for the captives, the journey was itself a form of attrition. Once at their destination, working conditions were harsh and unrelenting. Laborers toiled from sunrise to sunset, with minimal rest and poor rations, often little more than bread, porridge, and water. In the hot summers, quarry and field workers faced dehydration and heat exhaustion. In winter, exposure to freezing winds and snow was common. Injuries from heavy lifting, accidents with tools, and untreated illness could be fatal. These conditions served both practical and